Hi, today we're going to talk about a number of shrubs. I've been asked for some suggestions on what I think are some of the best plants to grow here, woody plants. I'm talking about medium-sized, some a little on the tall side, some a little shorter, but woody plants that are tough and beautiful and do well in the area, the wider Santa Clarita area, shall we call it. Anyway, I'm going to start off on a rainbow beginning with reds, and it may go fairly quickly because there are an awful lot of them I want to cover here. In the future, we'll look into flowers and trees and other plants as well. But here we go with some of the really good shrubs that can handle our drought, handle our poor soil, and most of them will take full sun unless I mention that they will not. Okay, going to start off with the Calliandra, the fairy duster, and it comes in pink and red. The pink is a Calliandra eriophyllum, and the red is a Californica. And as you can see, they're very showy. They're kind of semi-dormant. They keep a few of their leaves, and they have a fairly sparse leafing ability. They'll form nice shrubs, roughly 3 to 4 feet large, with these really cool characteristic looking fairy dusters. Also, the Calliandra is a California native. Not a California native because it actually grew in similar conditions naturally in Australia as opposed to California. But they get a lot of sun, a lot of very hungry soil, and high temperatures. So this one does really well, and it is extremely showy. It's a grevillea. There are lots of grevilleas. Many of them aren't really that happy in this area. There is one that's worth mentioning, the dwarf grevillea longiera, and that's a nice little low-growing ground cover woody plant that has sort of pink and white, those cool little bizarre-looking flowers. You can see great big piles of these little tiny flowers with little long tips on them and curly petals. The Grevillea Robin Mason is a cultivar that's really colorful, as you can see here, and it'll grow fairly flat and wide. I'd say about 2 to 3 feet maximum, and can grow to about 5 feet wide. Pretty plant, evergreen, and the only thing is you don't want to add a lot of phosphorus to the soil because they are phosphorus shy. Another of my favorites is the Pudica granatum. It's a pomegranate, and there are dwarf ones that only grow about 2 to 3 feet tall. The average pomegranate will grow about 6 feet or maybe 7 feet and about 4 to 5 feet wide. It's quite large. And there are some that are fruitless and ornamental with pink and red double flowers, and you get them that are just with the plain red flower. Here's an example of how showy the flower is on an ordinary fruiting pomegranate. So you get lovely, very healthy fruits and a very showy plant. The Lobelia laxiflora is very delicate, but sort of, well, you can see it kind of curves, and it's a very elegant looking plant. It does prefer some dappled shade or some hot sun shade in the afternoon. Grows to roughly 3 feet by 3 feet. It is in the Lobelia family. Real pretty plant. Can take a little more water than some of the really tough ones, but it's worth it for its very graceful habit of growth. The Tacoma, for the most part, does come from America, although not necessarily this area, and it really had a long blooming period with big clusters of colorful flowers in brick reds, yellows, and oranges. Some of these can grow just a few feet tall, and other ones up to 12 feet tall. They will possibly die back if we have a rare hard frost, but they'll be back blooming in late spring right through the autumn, sometimes even into the winter. You can cut them back to keep them a little better in shape. This next plant, as we are passing from our reds to oranges and now into yellows, is Acacia. I think they just love to rename these plants. As soon as you get used to one, then they decide to change the name on them again. I'm sure there are reasons, but I'm not into that part of it. They sometimes now have changed the cassias, many of the cassias, into sennas, and that's Senna. And this is a particularly lovely one I find in this area because it blooms so outlandishly, has beautiful feathery grayish foliage, grows about 4 feet to 6 feet. I've been able to save seeds and grow them in my garden for the next year. As we go close to your, you can see as this close-up gets right in there, that these have long bean-like pods that turn dark brown and crispy when the seeds are ripe. You can look and see again, the seeds are very easily removed. So rather than planting them directly in the ground, I've had a lot more success putting them individually into pots as seeds and letting them sprout. Now you can use these cassias for a bright splash of color in the early spring, or use them in garden beds singly, or even on slopes, where despite looking very fragile, they are pretty tough with the drought and with bad soil. Again, full sun for this one. Real showy. I like to kind of spot it through my garden. It blooms a lot in a time where you don't have an awful lot blooming. Here's a plant that I don't think it deserves so many pronunciations, but I always learned it was Caesalpinia gillesii, some say Caesalpinia, and it is such a beautiful plant. It looks exotic. It can give you almost a tropical look with these great big panicles of yellow flowers with bright red anthers. It's very showy. It blooms all through the summertime. It does entice bees and a lot of other wildlife that like it. Again, it's a pretty plant. It has a sparse growth with very delicate looking leaves, so you can kind of look through it. It's not real thick. It can grow fairly tall to 6 and maybe even 7 feet, but it doesn't take up a lot of room, and it's very delicate looking and very, very showy when it blooms. There's another variety that's become very, very popular. I have found it's very finicky. Certain areas it does great in throughout Santa Clarita, and I've seen some very nicely in Agua Dulce. But the one that seems to be most reliable is the Gillesii, the Caesalpinia gillesii. The Caesalpinia or Caesalpinia pulcherrima, that has equally very beautiful colored flowers. These are all sort of in reds and with a little bit of an orange edging. Both of these plants are extremely showy and make you feel like you're living in a place that's very lush, yet they will take our hot sun. The brightly yellow flowered Jerusalem sage, which is the Phlomis fruticosa, is actually neither from Jerusalem nor is it a true sage. However, it's a really pretty little plant, and I say little because it is a woody shrub, basically around 3 by 3 feet to, if it's really, really happy, 4 by 6 feet. And it has wonderful spirals of these woolly yellow flowers, and the leaves are rather soft and fuzzy as well. It's a pretty plant. It blooms just beautifully in the late spring or early summer, and there are varieties that come with a pink or purple flower, but I find the yellow ones are the toughest. There is one that grows a bit smaller, only about 2 feet tall, and that's the Phlomis lanata, a very well-behaved variety. Now, as we move into the purple spectrum, we'll start with the Salvia canariensis, the canary sage that, not too surprisingly, hails from the Canary Islands. The weather's not so different from ours, so it's not really that surprising that the canariensis actually does well in California, in a place that has a chaparral environment, which is fairly akin to what you expect to find in the Mediterranean. This one grows big. It grows big out and it grows big up. It can grow to about 7 by 7 feet. So if you want something to fill in a big space, this is your plant. It does get woody, but the first foot or so of its new growth is very soft and it's coated with this wonderful fuzz. It's like patting a soft white kitten. Has lovely arrow-shaped leaves. It gives it a very soft, gentle kind of gray color. And then it has these outrageous panicles of bright sort of red-purple flowers that just keep going. They do attract bees, they do attract butterflies, and they have kind of a typical sage smell to them. Real pretty. You can cut them and bring them in, although they will kind of fall all over the place. They will also self-seed in the garden, but if you want something big and showy that has a long blooming period of time and is really easy to take care of, this is the one to go for. However, the Salvia canariensis is not that easy to find. I usually have some some self-seeded ones kicking around, but you don't see them in the stores too often. Chances are you can find them if you look on the internet, however. There are so many salvias great for the garden, from the edible common sage, the Salvia officinalis, to showy garden flowers, to these woody salvias. There are an assortment of salvia wildflowers that even grow in the local canyons and hillsides around where we live, like the black sage, as you see here, or the Salvia pachyphylla, known as the Mojave sage. Here are two garden salvias that have been kind of put together from the black sage, the Salvia mellifera, and the Mojave sage, the Salvia pachyphylla. They've been inbred together to create showy, longer blooming cultivars. They're referred to as nativars. The first is the Mojave sage. The wild version grows a little smaller with slightly duller coloration. It thrives in the canyon hills and to the edges of the desert. The cultivars, however, are more colorful and look great all year round. It's a cross between the best of the natives. So I'm testing this one for high country gardens, and it's called the Salvia pachyphylla mulberry flambe, which is very exotic sounding. I think because of the flowers that have almost cranberry-looking bracts and beautiful blue flowers. This pachyphylla is native to, well, the mountains and the canyons. So as you can imagine, it would be perfect for us in our gardens. It's a lower growing variety with contrasting soft gray foliage and those bright bicolored flowers. Another one, the Salvia clevelandii, has a huge family with a lot of really different cultivars and a few nativars in it, but I'm only going to talk about the Winifred Gilman that has been around for a while, but has really stood the test of time. It grows in a neater and smaller habit of growth than the other Clevelandia varieties. Both of these varieties grow at about 2.5 by 2.5 feet. That is, I would say the Clevelandii probably gets a little closer to 3 feet high by 2.5 feet wide. And this lower growing habit is really preferable for wildfire resistance. The blooming starts in late winter, and they're they have enough blooms that they really stand out. And sometimes purple colors kind of blend into the environment. These don't. They are really pretty and will make a nice scene in your garden. They need no coddling since they're quite at home in our conditions. In fact, their ancestors grew in our area. So you could try either of these really good types of salvias to add. It truly isn't fair for me to do any recommendations on plants and leave out the two really outstanding good growers in this area that have so many multiple uses, and that is lavender and rosemary. They grow well, they're great for using in sachets, in crafts, and it doesn't matter what variety, and in cooking. It doesn't matter what you want to get. Some of them are good also medicinally and for your animals. I'm just going to pull out a couple of my real favorites, the lavender stoeckis, which is Spanish lavender. You'll see those sold a lot. There are dwarf varieties that are only 2 feet tall. The larger ones tend to go between 3 and 4. And they have bred them to have all kinds of colors, mostly purples, whites, and sometimes some green in them. There's a new variety, it's new within the last few years anyway, called the Lavender Merlot. And or Merlot, Meerlo. And it's a cool looking plant because although it just has pale flowers on it, it has really pretty foliage with a lot of cream suffused through those wonderfully smelling leaves. And you can use it just about everywhere. It grows a lot smaller than some of the other varieties, maybe only about 2 feet tall, and can easily spread to 2 or 3 feet wide. Really nice looking plant, and it's a good contrast to just about anything you can grow in your garden right now. Again, all the different lavenders, whether they grow dwarf or along the ground or tall and high, and the same thing with the rosemaries, are all edible and all have the same basic practical uses. On that same subject, I tend to recommend the rosemary Ken Taylor if you want a nice shrub with really good behavior. It has really deep sky blue flowers instead of the usual, well, I'm not really sure whether I'm gray or white or kind of bluish, kind of pale looking flowers that most rosemaries have. This one and a few others do have some really nice solid blue flowers, as well as, of course, the useful foliage. Some will grow really low along the ground. Some will grow tall and bushy up to 6 by 6 feet. The Ken Taylor will stay at a nice, neat 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. And this is admittedly my favorite plant. It's a total personal choice. It can look kind of wild and woolly. It is funny I should come up with woolly because they're the woolly blue curls or the Trichosta melanatum. These are actually local native plants. Very woody, can look a little bit like a very small tree, more often is sort of a sprawling shrub. It looks very herbal. It has those herbal looking, almost kind of rosemary type leaves, has a strong smell to it, and it blooms any place between early to late winter. Sometimes, depending on our weird weather, it'll bloom actually as late as early spring. And it has these cool little curly flowers on it that are fuzzy. They can be real blue or they can be kind of purple, and some of them are half and half. You might come across one of these if you go wandering out in the hills. They're wonderful plants because they grow here. They do need it totally dry in the summer, so don't coddle them after they get to 1 or 2 years old. Once they've been settled in, at first, yes, do give them a little extra attention. This is a Russian sage, another plant that is probably not Russian and definitely not a sage. It's a Borovskia. And although there are various varieties, some of them are a little smaller, some of them are a little bit bigger. For the most part, they tend to grow about 4 feet tall, and they are very feathery looking. They look like great big feathers of grayish foliage, and when they bloom, that top of the foliage sort of breaks into feathery purple flowers, little tiny purple flowers. And it's that gray blending into purple is very colorful, very soft, really pretty design element that you can add to your garden. Again, real tough. I do tend to cut them back to keep them from getting too sprawly, and does really well in this area. Here we have the Melaleuca nesophila. It's a honey myrtle is one of the common names. Very dense, shrub that looks, you could say it's a small tree. It's good to be used for hedges. It's good as a specimen. It's a nice little focal point to put in because it blooms really nicely in the springtime with very round little fuzzy balls of pinky purple flowers. They just look soft and cozy, and they're nestled in the little soft, little round leaved foliage. You can trim it into shape. You can do pretty much what you want with it. It is one of the few melaleucas that does really well out here. There are all kinds of rock roses. They are great small shrubs. Some of them will clamber along the ground and only be maybe 10 inches, 12 inches tall. Most of them are really well behaved looking plants that for you can kind of trim them, but don't put them into those really formal balls and squares. They don't do real well for that. You want to see the flowers, big open platters, probably more like a single rose, which is probably where the rock rose got its name from. My favorite is an old variety. It's easy to find, and it's called Sunset because it's such a bright color. It's bright pink, sort of a fluorescent. No, it's not quite fluorescent, but it's really a hot pink open flower which stands out in a desert-like community like we have for our gardens. Frequently, you don't get a lot of real bright flowers, or you might get them in the yellows and reds. It's kind of nice to have one in a bright pink. Easy to grow, low water, and you can use a lot of them in groups, or you can use single ones. You can parade them for a formal garden in a row. Uh, you can use them for a lot of things. Nice flowers, pretty long blooming period. Probably one of the showiest of the California natives is the Matilaha poppy or Matiaha poppy. It's a rhamnea, and it has enormous big, yes they are, white petaled flowers with great big sunshine centers to them, sort of like big fried eggs. And it has sort of bluish gray green foliage, grows up long stalks up to 6 or 8 feet tall even, covered at the very top with those big flowers. Great for a background plant, very fussy plant. You'll tell it where it wants to go and it'll refuse, and then it'll pick a spot where you don't want it and grow there. But once it's established, it forms a whole colony, and it can be a big, thick shrub plant filler. If you have an area where you can make it happy, it will do well, and it'll hang in there year after year and keep spreading with underground runners. Give it full sun or light shade. It's a native plant, easy to grow once it finds a place that it's really happy, and a great conversation piece in the garden. I'm just going to quickly mention the vitex, the white vitex. This is pretty hard to find. It's not real common, and we'll talk more about the blue vitex, which is a lot more easily found, and that's a proper small tree. The white tends to grow a little more like a very big shrub. It'll be a good 5 or 6 feet tall, and it will not self-seed the way the purple one does, but you need a place where you want a big showy shrub that will bloom for about a month, usually in the early summer, and that's about it. But it's unusual, it's fun, and we'll talk more about the vitex when we go through trees. There are plenty more wonderful flowers in the rainbow that you can use that do well here, flowering shrubs, that is. These are just some of my favorites, and I'm going to end on kind of a blend here. These are pictures of a leucophyllum. Most commonly you see the Texas Ranger version. This one is the leucophyllum bubblegum or prunosum, and it's kind of I think probably one of the showiest. Some of these leucophyllums have pink flowers, have bright pink flowers, pale flowers. Light purpley pink is the most common. This one has a very soft light gray foliage and very purple flowers, so I think it kind of stands out more than most of them. It grows really well in this area, does not get out of hand, probably about 3 to 4 feet tall and maybe a little less wide depending on the space that it's growing in. And this one's kind of happily gotten to be pals with an artichoke. And artichokes, just to let you know, you can bring edible things into your flowering environment as well without necessarily having a fruit or vegetable garden for them. And the artichoke is probably one of the biggest, showiest, and toughest of the edible plants that you're going to grow out here. It takes drought, it takes sun, it takes our terrible soil. You do not need to amend your soil for any of these plants. In fact, it's recommended you don't. They like a hungry soil like we have, even though our soils will vary with being sandier or stonier or more clayey or even some with caliche in them. They still are not full of a lot of organic matter, and all these plants do well on low organic matter. One more thing about the artichoke is that if you leave some of those artichokes that we eat are buds. So if you leave some of those artichokes on the plant and let them open up, they turn into quite beautiful, they look like big oval paintbrushes with almost an electrical blue bristles on the end. And then if you let them dry out, you might have some viable seeds that you can try planting in other places and get more artichokes. They, of course, are also delicious and very healthy to eat. There are so many more that I didn't even touch on here. Hopefully we'll have time in the future, but I didn't want to make this too terribly long. If you want more information, you can scan back, go over this recording, find the ones you like best, and look up more information on them. But this should be a pretty good treasure trove of plants that should do really well in the Santa Clarita Valley and its surrounding towns and cities.